He's an idiot. There is no reason.
If Anthony Joshua puts 10-ounce gloves on and gets in a boxing ring and Jake Paul is in the other corner, this won't last long. This will last as long as Josh wants it to last.
From the minute he got into that ring, to get on the back foot and just start running around, it was quite pathetic, to be honest with you.
There was never a world in which Jake Paul was going to beat. And whoever believed that Jake Paul was going to win, that was an absolute fairy tale.
Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua is over. Thank God it's over. What a joke of a fight.
The collective delusion that gripped a segment of the sporting world leading up to the bell was, in retrospect, a fascinating study in marketing over matter, a moment where the lines between digital celebrity and athletic reality were blurred to a dangerous degree. Whoever actually allowed themselves to believe that Jake Paul was going to walk out of that ring with his hand raised was subscribing to an absolute fairy tale, a narrative spun from viral clips and carefully curated bravado that evaporated the moment the first punch was thrown.
Changing the sport.
Jake Paul is concerned because that's not boxing. He was just trying to survive. And when you try to survive in a fight, then the other guy can't knock you out because you're not looking to win.
The spectacle of Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua is finally over, and the overwhelming sentiment from the boxing community is a sigh of relief, a collective thank God that sanity has been restored to the timeline. To call it a fight feels generous to the concept of competition. From the minute Jake Paul stepped through the ropes, the energy shifted from arrogance to survival. The strategy, if one could call it that, was immediate retreat. Seeing a self-proclaimed disruptor of the sport get on the back foot and simply run around the perimeter of the ring was pathetic to witness, a stark revelation that the internet fame that built the event had no currency inside the squared circle. There was simply never a universe, parallel or otherwise, in which Jake Paul was going to defeat Anthony Joshua. The aftermath has been less of a debate and more of a coroner's report, with Jake Paul getting brutally crumbled by boxing experts and casual fans alike following a loss that managed to be both hilarious in its inevitability and embarrassing in its execution. The pretty boy experiment, which had been lucrative and loud for years, finally crashed into the wall of heavyweight physics, ending with broken jaws, busted ribs, and the kind of catastrophic damage that occurs when unearned confidence meets elite kinetic energy. Critics had warned for months that this was an act of idiocy, that there was no logical reason for the bout to exist other than commerce. They predicted that if Anthony Joshua put on 10-ounce gloves and stepped into a boxing ring with serious intent, the duration of the match would be entirely up to him. It would last exactly as long as Joshua wanted it to last, and not a second longer. Let us not pretend that the outcome was shocking. Anyone with a functioning brain and even a rudimentary understanding of the sweet science knew exactly how this script ended. It has been a wild, chaotic few years watching Jake Paul move through the sport of boxing like a wealthy tourist collecting souvenirs, picking fights that looked good on posters but lacked substance in the ring. The pattern was undeniable and effective. You cannot lose to a guy perceived to be a YouTuber, so you fight retired mixed martial artists who have spent a lifetime grappling, or former champions who are so far past their expiration date that they are fighting on fumes and memories. He fought athletes whose main relationship with punching involved a basketball, creating a resume built on loud build-ups, viral knockout clips, selective matchmaking, and endless monologues about changing the face of the sport. But then 2025 arrived, and the carefully constructed facade faced a demolition crew. Suddenly, Jake Paul was not standing across from a wrestler learning to box or a basketball player needing a paycheck. He was standing across from Anthony Joshua, a former unified heavyweight champion of the world, a man with Olympic gold around his neck and real scars from real wars etched into his history. The sheer audacity required to stand in there with Joshua is worth noting, but bravery is often indistinguishable from foolishness until the first punch lands. Some gave Paul credit for having the balls to step in with a refreshed, dangerous Joshua, but that credit evaporated as the bell rang. Joshua came into the ring with more than 25 professional wins, multiple reigns at the top of the division, and a pedigree that started with gold at the London 2012 Olympics. In stark contrast, Jake Paul entered with 13 professional fights, absolute zero of which were against active or former heavyweight champions, and none that demanded elite defensive discipline. The gulf in class was not just a gap. It was a canyon. Critics noted that Paul was essentially paid $90 million to try and survive, and even that proved to be too tall a task. He ran around the ring, desperate to keep distance, But the ring, no matter how large, eventually shrinks when a predator knows how to cut off the angles from the opening seconds. The contrast in skill sets was not subtle. It was glaring. Joshua controlled the distance like someone who had been living in that high-pressure environment for over a decade. He set traps, he dictated the pace, and he allowed Paul to burn nervous energy chasing moments that were never going to materialize. The size difference alone told a significant part of the story, but the experience gap told the rest. Paul had spent the entire fight week talking about knockouts and making statements, selling the dream to his followers. Joshua, conversely, simply showed up to work. He was trying to find his range, and as the fight went longer, the big actions Paul attempted, the desperate overhand rights, the lunging shots, only served to fatigue him faster. The early rounds were quiet in the way a fuse burning down is quiet, dangerous and inevitable. Joshua was patient, measured, and terrifyingly calm. He was not rushing. He was not loading up on wild swings. He was letting the ring shrink around Paul, suffocating him with presence before he suffocated him with violence. Jake tried to sell confidence with his facial expressions, but his footwork told the truth of his internal state. He was backing up consistently, resetting late, and reacting to Joshua instead of initiating his own offense. This is where reality arrives in heavyweight boxing. When the knockout finally came, it did not feel shocking to anyone who had been honest about the matchup from the start. The sentiment from the corner was grim. You know you are likely going to get knocked out, so the hope is that you go out on your shield, earning the respect of the boxing fraternity by fighting fire with fire. Instead, the audience watched a man run for his life for 5 or 6 rounds. It was a survival horror movie masked as a sporting event. One of the most respected voices in the sport, Teddy Atlas, had warned about this exact scenario. With 50 years in the game, Atlas knows where the floorboards are weak, where you can twist an ankle, and where you can break a leg. His message was brutally consistent. Heavyweight fundamentals do not forgive. At lighter weights, speed and athleticism can sometimes mask technical deficiencies. Mistakes can be survived. But at heavyweight, mass multiplied by acceleration equals disaster. Atlas pointed out that Paul never really tried to win a single second of the fight. He was attempting to throw a home run punch every once in a while, hoping for a lottery ticket payout that never came. Every time he got into the clinch, he collapsed, hugging Anthony Joshua and dropping to the canvas to kill time, forcing the referee to break them up. It was a tactic born of desperation. Atlas emphasized that when someone lacks elite defensive habits, the division itself becomes the opponent. You are not just fighting a man. You are fighting physics, leverage, timing, and consequences. Jake Paul had never lived in that world before that night. You cannot outbox a technician like Joshua by waiting on him, especially when he is feinting you into counters and then countering your counters. Even the most optimistic analysts, who usually argue that a heavyweight always has a puncher's chance, had to concede that this logic didn't apply here. That old adage only works when both fighters understand the delivery systems required to land that punch. When one does not, the puncher's chance becomes a puncher's risk. Carl Froch, never one for diplomacy, did not mince words. He reminded the world that Paul had already lost to Tommy Fury, a cruiserweight who never reached British title level. That loss alone should have been the indicator of where the ceiling was. If Paul struggled with a regional cruiserweight, jumping straight to a unified heavyweight champion was not ambition. It was denial. Froch emphasized that boxing progression exists for a reason. You do not skip levels in a sport designed to punish shortcuts. The physical numbers only made the conversation harsher. Joshua carried over a 100-pound weight advantage on fight night, coupled with a reach differential exceeding 6 inches. That is not trivia. That is control. It is control of range, control of exchanges, and control of when the violence happens. Critics were quick to shut down the excuses. Some tried to argue that the ring was too small, but others pointed out it was a standard 22 or 24-foot ring. It was huge. The issue wasn't the space. It was the man occupying it. It looked like there were moments where Paul wanted to throw in the towel, to claim injury and exit with some health remaining, but he kept getting up until he physically couldn't. By the 6th round, the writing was not just on the wall. It was carved into it. Betting markets had reflected this long before the first bell rang. Joshua entered as a massive favorite with odds implying well over an 85% chance of victory. This was not disrespect. This was math. The market saw what the hype tried to hide. Experience, size, skill, and history matter. Loud confidence does not change probabilities, and no amount of podcast talking points can stop a right hand traveling at 40 miles per hour.